Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you've ever engaged a professional financial advisor, you probably know the process can feel quite intense. There's paperwork, lots of quite probing questions, and these very formal reports.
Yeah, it can seem a bit daunting from the outside.
So today, we're kind of peeling back the curtain on all that complexity. We're taking a really in-depth look at the structured six-stage framework. It's basically the mandatory compliance blueprint that advisors in the UK have to follow.
And it's more than just, a box-ticking exercise. This is really the regulatory defense mechanism for you, the client. We're examining this professional financial advice process that ensures every single recommendation is suitable, it's transparent, and it's built on solid, verifiable data.
Yeah.
It's really the essential ethical framework required to make any advice compliant.
So our mission in this deep dive is, it's to break down these stages, showing you exactly how and why this structure is in place. Because by understanding this pretty robust process, you're not just learning regulatory steps, you're actually empowering yourself to recognize high quality, accountable financial planning.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Stage 1 and 2, the foundational steps. This is all about establishing trust and sort of mapping the territory.
Stage 1 is completely non-negotiable, establishing the client relationship. We sometimes call this the transparency check because really, before a single piece of advice is even thought about, the advisor has to clearly lay out the terms of engagement and the nature of their service, too.
That's right. The FCA rules are incredibly clear on this. The client absolutely needs to know two critical things right up front.
Okay, what are they?
First, the service status. Is the advice independent? Which means they search the whole market for you. Or is it restricted? Meaning they operate from a limited panel of providers or products.
Right. Independent or restricted. Got it.
And second, how is the advisor actually remunerated? Is it fees paid directly by you, the client? Is it commission paid by the product provider, maybe? Or sometimes it's a mix of both.
So this first stage, it immediately forces accountability, doesn't it?
It has to.
If trust is supposed to be the cornerstone of a financial relationship, these disclosures are kind of the first bricks in that wall. Knowing the scope and the cost structure, it defines the expectation from the get-go.
Precisely. And once that initial contract, that agreement is established, we move straight into stage 2, fact-finding.
The detective work stage.
Exactly. And the sources we looked at really stress this. If you skip this stage or even just rush it, the entire advice structure that follows is potentially flawed. Seriously flawed.
So it's the ultimate data deep dive then. We're talking about gathering really exhaustive detail on your life. Financial goals, assets, liabilities, income, spending.
Existing financial products, your family situation, future plans, hopes, everything.
And critically, as you sort of hinted at, this isn't just punching numbers into a spreadsheet, is it?
No, not at all. Fact-finding is both quantitative, that's the hard numerical data, the stuff that fills out the balance sheet, and it's also deeply qualitative.
That qualitative side, I think that often gets overlooked, but that's where the real professional judgment comes in, isn't it? We're talking about the subjective stuff, the emotional side of money.
Exactly right. It captures those behavioral insights. For example, the advisor needs to gauge your true feelings about investment risk. You might say you're comfortable with high risk.
But maybe your history shows otherwise.
Precisely. Or your body language, even. They need to understand if you prioritize, say, ethical investing, or if you're the type to panic sell when markets get choppy. It takes real professional skill and, frankly, good listening and open questions to uncover those maybe subconscious biases.
Okay, but that sounds incredibly difficult to standardize. If a big part of stage 2 relies on the advisor's judgment in assessing qualitative things like, psychological comfort, how does the regulator make sure that assessment is consistent and defensible?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it gets to the heart of the whole regulatory framework. Consistency, it's sought through standardized documentation and the absolute mandate for robust record keeping.
The records again.
Always the records. The advisor has to document not just what they found out, but how they arrived at that qualitative assessment. We're talking notes from meetings, the context, the rationale behind their judgment. If they ever face scrutiny, maybe from the FCA or in a complaint, they have to be able to defend the professional judgment they used right back in that fact find.
Wow. Okay, that distinction, it really elevates stage 2. It's not just data entry, it's genuine intellectual work.
Definitely. So moving on from gathering all that data, the map of your life essentially, the real intellectual heavy lifting begins. Translating that map into a legally suitable strategy. Which brings us neatly to stage 3, assessing suitability.
And this is the absolute core requirement, isn't it? Mandated explicitly by FCA rules. Suitability is the ultimate test.
It is.
The advisor has to prove, through documented analysis, that every single recommendation perfectly aligned with the client's circumstances, their objectives, and, crucially, that risk profile they established earlier.
And the analysis is quite multi-layered. It involves looking at affordability. I mean, can you actually afford the premiums or the investments consistently? Liquidity, do you need access to that capital anytime soon? Your time horizon, when do you actually need the money back or need the goal achieved?
And tax, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. And, of course, the ever-present question of tax implications. Can't forget tax.
Okay, let's drill down on risk assessment here for a second, because the sources we read are really clear that it involves two different crucial measurements that I think listeners often mix up: risk tolerance and capacity for loss. We can't just gloss over this. What is the difference?
Yeah, it's vital. It's essentially the difference between feeling and finance. Risk tolerance is your psychological comfort level, how you feel about taking risks. Do you get jittery when the market dips 10%? That's tolerance.
Okay, the emotional response.
Exactly. Whereas capacity for loss is purely financial. It's about what you can actually afford to lose in monetary terms without it significantly damaging your standard of living or your ability to meet essential future needs like retirement income.
Right, so you could have someone earning a lot, big savings pot, but they're psychologically quite cautious.
Yeah.
They'd have a high capacity for loss, but maybe a low risk tolerance.
Perfectly put. Or conversely, you might get a young, perhaps eager investor with a really high tolerance. They want to, swing for the fences. But because they have limited capital, their actual capacity for loss is very low.
So what happens then?
Well, the advisor is mandated, legally required, to reconcile these two. If your tolerance suggests a highly volatile investment, maybe aiming for high growth, but your capacity for loss is near zero, the advisor must recommend a lower risk profile. They have to prioritize your capacity for loss over your psychological appetite for risk.
That clarity is so important. It really shows the regulation is designed to protect the client, sometimes even from themselves. And the documents we saw state that while advisors use standardized risk profiling tools, questionnaires and things,
they have to be supplemented by that professional judgment we talked about earlier. You can't just rely on the score from a quiz.
Right. The human element remains crucial. Okay, so once that rigorous suitability check is done and dusted, we get to stage 4, making recommendations. And the formal output here is a required document, often called a suitability report.
That's the one. The report itself is a key regulatory document, and its structure is designed to be highly protective of you, the client.
And it can't be full of impenetrable jargon, right?
Absolutely not. It must be written in clear, plain language. The FCA is very strict on that.
Yeah.
And the content requirements are pretty stringent, too.
So what has to be in it?
Okay, so the report must clearly outline your original goals. It needs to summarize the advisor's current understanding of your needs based on that fact find, and then explain specifically how the chosen recommendations meet those identified needs, whether that's investments, pensions, insurance, whatever.
But I think the real accountability measure here is in the disclosure requirements within that report. The advisor must disclose all the relevant costs, risks, and this is a really key point, I think, any alternative options that were considered but rejected.
Yes. Explaining why alternatives were considered is so powerful. Why do you think that is?
Well, I suppose it provides a clear audit trail, proving they didn't just pick the first option that came to mind, or maybe the easiest one, or perhaps the one that paid them the most commission back in the day.
Exactly. It demonstrates the advisor actually surveyed the landscape. They weighed up different viable solutions, maybe a competing pension product, maybe a different investment strategy, and then they had to defensively articulate why the chosen option was the most suitable one for you. It's basically verification that they genuinely acted in your best interest.
That mandatory documentation of the rejected options, that really underscores the sort of fiduciary intent behind the regulation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It moves advice from just being a recommendation to being demonstrable proof of professional diligence.
Couldn't agree more. So once you, the client, have absorbed that report, maybe asked questions, and agreed to the recommendations laid out
in that comprehensive suitability report,
we move pretty swiftly into stage 5, implementation.
Okay, so this is where the strategy actually becomes reality. the practical bit.
It is. The advisor has to promptly and carefully arrange for the products or services to be put in place, setting up accounts, executing investment trades, arranging insurance policy transfers. It's the transactional phase.
And immediately, that regulatory pillar of record keeping is back in the spotlight, isn't it?
It never really leaves. Every single transaction, every fund movement, every email or phone call during implementation, it all has to be logged meticulously.
This strict record keeping, it ensures there's a clear audit trail of how the advice was actually put into practice.
Right. And for pensions and investments especially, firms are required to keep these detailed records for a minimum of 5 years, sometimes much longer, potentially indefinitely for certain pension advice.
Wow, indefinitely.
For certain types, yes. This longevity is crucial because, well, compliance issues or complaints can surface years, even decades, after the initial advice was given.
Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us logically into the final structural element, stage 6, review and ongoing service.
Because financial planning isn't a static object, it's dynamic, isn't it? Life changes constantly.
Yeah, incomes go up or down, marriages happen, divorces happen, kids go to university, retirement plans shift.
Yeah, markets themselves evolve, sometimes quite dramatically.
Therefore, advice fundamentally cannot be a one-off event. These regular reviews, often they're annual or maybe semi-annual, they're necessary to make sure the initial advice is still suitable, given your current situation and what the market's doing.
Exactly. If your circumstances change, maybe your capacity for loss changes or your goals shift, then the investment strategy or the protection plan has to be reviewed and potentially adjusted.
And running underneath all 6 of these stages, we kind of circle back to those central regulatory obligations we've mentioned. Comprehensive disclosure and rigorous record keeping.
They aren't just extra steps tacked on the end. They are the required infrastructure, the bedrock that makes the entire process work and makes it defensible.
That theme of mandatory transparency, it brings us perfectly back around to our final major insight, the difference between independent and restricted advice, a status that has to be disclosed right back at stage 1.
Yes, and it's a fundamental distinction. It's all about the scope of the advisor's playground, so to speak. Independent advisors, they're required to assess the whole of the market when they're forming their recommendations, offering advice that should be genuinely unbiased by product limitations.
Okay, the whole market and the alternative.
On the flip side, you have restricted advisors. They are limited in some way. They might only recommend products from a specific defined panel of providers, or perhaps they specialize only in one type of solution, like maybe just insurance products but not investments. Their universe of potential options is narrower.
Right.
And here's the key insight that I think often gets misunderstood. This distinction is fundamentally about scope, not inherently about the quality of the advice.
Ah, okay. So you might assume independence is automatically better, but that's not necessarily true.
Not necessarily, no. It's possible that a great restricted advisor, one who specializes exclusively in, say, complex final salary pension transfers or maybe niche ethical investments.
They might have deeper expertise in that narrow field.
Exactly. They might have a level of deep expertise in that very specific area that surpasses the knowledge of a more generalist, independent advisor. So the quality of the advice in that specific niche could actually be absolutely top tier.
So the power for you, the listener, is in understanding that the label restricted isn't automatically a red flag. It's more of a prompt to ask, okay, what are you restricted to, and how does that specialization potentially benefit my specific, perhaps narrow problem?
Precisely. The critical factor, the non-negotiable, is that the advisor must clearly, explicitly, and probably repeatedly tell the client which model applies independent or restricted. That guarantees there's no confusion about the range of options that are actually being considered on your behalf.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this really mean for you, the person potentially receiving financial advice? We've unpacked a pretty robust 6-stage professional structure. It moves logically from establishing foundational trust through highly technical data gathering, both quantitative and qualitative, rigorous suitability checks, formal documented recommendations, all the way through to implementation and that crucial ongoing suitability review.
And this mandated structure, it really demonstrates that Proper professional financial advice isn't just a sales process. It's a legal and ethical exercise fundamentally built on accountability.
Yeah.
It's designed to prioritize your needs as the client over, say, product sales targets at every single point in the journey. And that suitability needs to be verified, often annually or semi-annually.
So if we connect this knowledge directly to your own decision-making, understanding this required process really empowers you in two vital ways, I think. Well, first, you're now equipped to evaluate the quality and the compliance of any advice you receive. You know exactly what sort of documentation and analysis should be backing it up. You know what to look for in that suitability report.
That's a huge advantage. And second,
Maybe more subtly, it allows you to shift your focus. Instead of just evaluating the product being recommended right at the end, you can focus on how this transparent, documented framework, this whole process, actually builds lasting professional relationships. Relationships founded on demonstrable diligence and genuine, verifiable trust, not just hoping they're doing the right thing.
that's the goal, isn't it? Advice built on trust, underpinned by a robust, transparent process.
A true deep dive into professional accountability. Thank you for joining us.